Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we explore the brutal truth behind one of humanity's oldest space dreams, colonizing Mars. For more than a century, Mars has lived in the human imagination as the next world, a red desert beneath an alien sky, a place where rockets descend through dusty air, where domed cities glow in the cold, and where human civilization begins a second branch far from Earth. But the real Mars is not the romantic frontier we often imagine. It is colder, harsher, more toxic, more isolated, and more difficult than most visions of the future allow. Mars looks close because it belongs to our planetary neighborhood. It is a world we can see with telescopes, map with orbiters, and touch with robotic machines. Rovers have crossed its ancient lakebeds. Landers have listened to its winds. Satellites have traced its dry valleys, polar ice, volcanoes, impact basins, dust storms, and mineral layers. Mars is not fantasy. It is a real place with real terrain, real history, and real scientific promise. And yet, a place can be reachable and still not be livable. That is the central problem. What is actually preventing humans from colonizing Mars? The simple answer is not distance alone. Distance matters, but distance is only the beginning. Mars is difficult because almost everything humans need to survive must be brought, built, recycled, or protected. Air, pressure, heat, water, food, shielding, power, medicine, spare parts, waste systems, communication, psychological stability, a safe place to sleep, a safe place to work, a safe way to repair what breaks. On Earth, these things are so constant that we barely notice them. The atmosphere presses gently against the body. Oxygen enters the lungs without machinery. Liquid water falls from the sky, flows in rivers, and fills oceans. A magnetic field and thick atmosphere help shield life from much of the harsh radiation of space. Gravity holds the body in the condition it evolved to use. Soil, sunlight, microbes, weather, plants, and ecosystems form a planetary life support system older than humanity itself. Earth does most of the work quietly. Mars does almost none of it. That is the brutal truth hidden beneath the dream. A Mars settlement is not simply a city moved to another planet. It is not the same civilization placed under a red sky. At first, it would be a sealed life support machine with people inside it. Every breath would depend on engineering. Every drink of water would depend on extraction, purification, storage, or recycling. Every meal would depend on transported supplies or controlled agriculture in artificial environments. Every warm room would exist because power systems fought against a planet that is naturally hostile to the human body. Mars is often described as the most Earth-like planet in the solar system, and in some ways, that is true. It has a day length not too different from Earth's. It has seasons. It has polar ice. It has mountains, plains, canyons, ancient river channels, and evidence that liquid water once shaped its surface. Compared with Venus, with its crushing atmosphere and extreme heat, Mars seems almost welcoming. Compared with the gas giants and icy outer moons, Mars feels close and solid. But most Earth-like does not mean Earth-like enough. Mars is a frozen desert under a thin atmosphere. Its air is mostly carbon dioxide, far too thin and unbreathable for humans. Its surface pressure is so low that an unprotected human body could not survive. Liquid water is unstable across most of the surface under present conditions. The temperature can be brutally cold. Fine dust covers the landscape and may pose mechanical and health challenges. The planet lacks a global magnetic field like Earth's and has only a thin atmosphere. leaving the surface exposed to more radiation than life receives on our home world. The dream says, Mars is our next home. The reality asks, how do you build home where home does not exist? A human being is not a machine that can be placed anywhere. The body is an Earth-shaped organism. It carries the memory of one planet in its bones, blood, lungs, immune system, muscles, sleep cycles, and microbiome. It evolved under Earth gravity, Earth pressure, Earth radiation levels, Earth chemistry, Earth day-night cycles, and Earth biology. To live on Mars, humans would have to carry a pocket of Earth with them, not symbolically, but physically. A habitat on Mars would need to recreate a small version of Earth's protective conditions. It would need breathable air at safe pressure. It would need temperature control. It would need radiation shielding. It would need protection from dust intrusion. It would need power generation and storage. It would need systems for carbon dioxide removal, oxygen production, water recovery, humidity control, waste treatment, fire safety, and emergency backup. And unlike a base in Antarctica or a submarine beneath the ocean, Mars would be separated from Earth by interplanetary distance. Help would not be hours away. It would not be days away. Depending on the positions of the planets, communication delays alone would make real-time conversation impossible. Supplies would have to be launched across space during limited windows. Emergency return would be difficult, slow, and sometimes impossible in the way people imagine rescue. A serious failure on Mars would not be a local accident. It could become a survival crisis for everyone inside the settlement. This is why Mars colonization is not just a rocket problem. Rockets are necessary, but rockets only deliver the question to the surface. The larger challenge begins after landing. Landing heavy payloads on Mars is already difficult. The atmosphere is thick enough to create heat and turbulence during entry, but too thin to slow massive spacecraft easily with parachutes alone. A small rover is one problem. A human habitat, ascent vehicle, fuel plant, power system, construction equipment, and years of supplies are another category entirely. A real settlement would require repeated successful landings, precision placement, cargo coordination, and reliable assembly far from Earth. But even if all of that worked, survival would still depend on continuity. A colony cannot function like a short expedition forever. It cannot rely only on stored supplies if it hopes to become permanent. It must learn to use local resources. It must find and process water ice. It must produce oxygen. It may need to make fuel for return journeys or local operations. It must repair machinery, manufacture parts, and eventually build more of its own infrastructure. That phrase sounds simple: use local resources. In practice, it is one of the hardest requirements of all. Mars offers materials, but not in convenient human form. Ice may be buried, mixed with soil, located in regions that are scientifically interesting but operationally difficult, or far from ideal landing sites. Extracting it would require machines that can dig, heat, separate, purify, and store water in extreme conditions. Making oxygen from the atmosphere requires power and equipment. Growing food requires controlled environments, nutrients, water recycling, lighting or managed sunlight, temperature stability, and protection from radiation and contamination. On Earth, agriculture is part of a living biosphere. On Mars, agriculture would be an engineered system fighting the planet at every step. Then there is radiation, one of the quietest and most serious obstacles. Space radiation is not dramatic in the way storms or explosions are dramatic. It is invisible. It passes through materials, damages cells, increases health risks, and becomes more concerning the longer humans remain beyond Earth's protective environment. The journey to Mars exposes astronauts to radiation in deep space. The surface adds more exposure over time. A Mars settlement may need to be partly underground, covered with regolith, or built with dedicated shielding. Storm shelters may be necessary for solar particle events. Habitats may need designs that treat radiation not as an occasional hazard, but as a constant environmental fact. The planet itself is not trying to kill us. It simply was not built for us. That difference matters. Mars is not hostile in a moral sense. It is indifferent. It has no breathable air because no biosphere maintains one. It has no thick shield because its atmosphere is thin and its magnetic history changed. It has no lakes under open sky because pressure and temperature do not support them in the way Earth does. It has no soil ready for crops in the terrestrial sense. It has no hospitals, no supply chains, no forests, no backup civilization over the horizon. Everything that makes Earth feel normal is the product of a planet shaped by geology, atmosphere, water, sunlight, magnetism, and life across immense time. Mars is what remains when many of those protections are absent. That is why colonizing Mars forces a deeper question than whether humans can be brave enough or wealthy enough to go. It asks whether civilization can reproduce the essential functions of a planet in miniature. Can we make a closed environment stable for years? Can we keep people healthy under partial gravity? Can we protect them from radiation without making construction impossible? Can we maintain machines when dust, cold, and distance punish every failure? Can we create a settlement that does not constantly depend on Earth for survival? A flag can be planted, a footprint can be made, a mission can return, but colonization means something more severe. It means permanence. It means children, hospitals, food systems, governance, industry, energy, maintenance, and culture. It means not only surviving Mars, but building a world support system there. It means turning an outpost into a society while the planet outside remains unable to support an unprotected human for even a short time. That is the difference between visiting Mars and colonizing Mars. The dream often compresses that difference into a single image: a rocket landing, a hatch opening, humans stepping onto red soil. But the real story is less about the first step and more about the million systems that must work after it. The first day is symbolic. The first year is engineering. The first generation is biology, psychology, logistics, and civilization under pressure. Mars is not impossible because it is far away. It is difficult because Earth is doing more for us than we usually understand. To live on Mars, humans would have to replace a planet's generosity with technology. They would have to bring air to a world without breathable air, warmth to a world of cold deserts, pressure to a world of near vacuum, shielding to a world exposed to radiation, and ecosystems to a world without forests, oceans, or rain. This does not make Mars colonization meaningless. It may be one of the most challenging projects humanity ever attempts. It may teach us how to live beyond Earth, how to build closed systems, how to protect life in extreme environments, and how fragile planetary habitability truly is. It may become possible in stages, through robotic preparation, temporary bases, resource extraction, improved propulsion, better life support systems, and long-term scientific ambition, but it should not be mistaken for destiny. Mars will not become a second Earth simply because humans want it to. The red planet offers a future only if we understand its reality clearly. Its beauty is real, its scientific value is immense, its symbolism is powerful, but the distance, Cold, radiation, thin atmosphere, dust, low gravity, and isolation are not minor inconveniences. They are the central facts. The dream of Mars is a dream of expansion. The reality of Mars is a test of survival. And between the two lies the brutal truth. To colonize Mars, humans must not only travel to another world, they must learn how to carry the conditions of life into a place where life has no natural shelter waiting. Mars is often spoken of as the next step after the Moon, but that comparison can be dangerously misleading. The Moon is difficult. It is airless, harsh, dusty, exposed to radiation, and hostile to unprotected life. No human can survive there without machines, pressure, oxygen, heat control, and carefully planned support. But the Moon is close enough to remain within Earth's immediate reach. It is close enough for short missions, close enough for near real-time communication, close enough that, under certain conditions, emergency return is at least imaginable. Mars is not like that. Mars is not simply the Moon with a red surface. It is a different category of distance. The Moon is Earth's companion, locked into the near neighborhood of our planet. Mars is another world orbiting the Sun on its own path, sometimes relatively close by planetary standards, sometimes far away on the other side of the solar system. The distance between Earth and Mars is not fixed. It changes constantly as both planets move around the Sunday. There are favorable windows when missions can be launched more efficiently, and long stretches when the geometry is far worse. That single fact changes everything. A trip to the Moon can be planned as a short expedition. A trip to Mars becomes an interplanetary commitment. The spacecraft cannot simply leave whenever humans decide. It must obey orbital mechanics. Launch windows open only at certain intervals when Earth and Mars align in a way that makes the journey practical. Miss that window, and the next opportunity may be far away in mission planning terms. This is not a minor scheduling issue. It shapes the entire architecture of Mars exploration. Supplies must be launched at the right times. Cargo missions must arrive before crewed missions. Return vehicles may need to be sent in advance. Fuel production may need to be confirmed before humans even depart. Spare parts, habitats, power systems, communication equipment, food, water processing machinery, medical supplies, and scientific instruments all have to fit into a choreography spread across interplanetary space. The Moon allows a kind of flexibility that Mars does not. If something goes wrong near the Moon, Earth is still nearby. Communication delays are short. Mission control can speak with crews almost instantly. A return can happen relatively quickly, depending on the mission profile and hardware. Rescue is still difficult, but the distance allows the possibility of rapid response. Mars removes that comfort. A crew on Mars cannot call Earth and have a real-time conversation. A message may take several minutes to reach Earth, and the reply may take several minutes to return. The delay changes with planetary distance, but the result is always the same. No instant help. No immediate advice in a crisis. No ground team talking astronauts through an emergency second by second, as if they were in low Earth orbit or near the Moon. On Mars, crews must be far more autonomous. They must diagnose problems themselves, repair systems themselves, make decisions under pressure without waiting for Earth. And if the emergency is physical, not informational, the problem becomes even more severe. A broken system on the Moon might be supported by a fast resupply or emergency mission in a way that is at least conceivable. A broken system on Mars may have no outside rescue option for months. The next cargo shipment may not arrive soon. The next launch window may not allow immediate help. The distance turns every failure into something more serious. Mars is not just another destination. It is a remote world where help may be months away. This changes how engineers think about reliability. A Mars mission cannot depend on fragile systems that require constant replacement from Earth. It cannot assume that spare parts can be rushed to the surface. It cannot rely on a single oxygen generator, a single power source, a single water system, a single communication link, or a single habitat pressure system without layers of backup. Redundancy becomes survival. Repairability becomes survival. Simplicity becomes survival. Every system has to be designed with distance in mind. If a machine breaks on Earth, parts can be ordered. If a machine breaks on the Moon, resupply is hard but not impossible on relatively short timescales. If a machine breaks on Mars, the settlement may have to manufacture, improvise, or cannibalize parts from existing equipment. That means colonizing Mars is not only about transporting humans, it is about transporting industrial capability. A real Mars settlement would need workshops, tools, materials, printers or manufacturing systems, diagnostic equipment, trained technicians, spare components, and the ability to repair systems that no one on Earth can physically touch. Distance turns maintenance into civilization. The supply chain becomes one of the hardest problems. On Earth, civilization is supported by enormous invisible networks, farms, factories, shipping routes, mines, electrical grids, water systems, hospitals, data networks, and millions of specialized workers. A city survives because thousands of supply lines feed it every day. Mars would begin with none of that. Every kilogram sent there must be launched from Earth or produced locally from Martian resources. At first, almost everything would be imported. That is expensive, slow, and risky. Even if rockets become cheaper and more capable, Mars remains far away. Launch mass is limited. Cargo can fail, landings can miss, equipment can break during transit. Dust, cold, radiation, and mechanical stress can damage systems after arrival. Supplies sent ahead must survive months in space and then function in an alien environment. A missing part on Earth is inconvenience. A missing part on Mars can become a mission-threatening gap. The distance problem is therefore also a planning problem. A Mars mission must think years ahead. What must be sent first? What must arrive before humans? What must be tested robotically? What must be duplicated? What must be stored? What must be made locally? What can fail safely? What cannot be allowed to fail at all? On the Moon, a mistake may be costly and dangerous. On Mars, the same mistake may be locked in for months with no easy correction. The distance turns uncertainty into exposure. It also changes human psychology. Astronauts on the Moon can look back and see Earth large in the sky. The home planet is distant, but visibly present. The psychological connection is immediate. The crew knows that Earth is close enough for communication, observation, and return within a relatively short mission window. On Mars, Earth becomes a bright point, not a world filling the sky, a point. The emotional meaning of that cannot be ignored. Humans are social, Earth-born animals. We evolved in environments filled with weather, landscapes, sound, color, community, and biological presence. A Mars crew would live under constant environmental dependence, inside sealed habitats, with limited privacy, delayed communication, and no immediate path home. The planet outside would be beautiful, but lethal. Earth would be distant not only physically, but psychologically. Isolation would be part of the mission, not temporary isolation like a remote research station, interplanetary isolation, The delay in communication also changes relationships. Conversations with family, medical teams, mission control, and friends would not flow naturally. Every exchange would become asynchronous. A question asked from Mars might not receive a reply for many minutes, and in an emergency, those minutes matter. In emotional life, they matter too. Delay stretches loneliness. It makes Earth feel less like a place you can reach and more like a memory transmitting back through space. For a short mission, crews may endure this with training and discipline. For colonization, it becomes a way of life. Mission planners must therefore consider not only rockets and habitats, but mental health, crew selection, conflict resolution, sleep, workload, autonomy, privacy, communication rhythms, cultural life, purpose. The knowledge that help is far away can become a psychological weight. The awareness that every system matters can create chronic stress. A Mars settlement must be engineered for minds as well as bodies. Distance also affects medicine. On Earth, a serious medical emergency can lead to specialists, hospitals, imaging systems, blood supplies, surgery, and intensive care. In low Earth orbit, evacuation may be possible. On the Moon, emergency return could be designed into some mission architectures. On Mars, medical independence becomes unavoidable. The crew would need medical training, equipment, pharmaceuticals, diagnostic tools, and the ability to handle emergencies without immediate specialist intervention. Appendicitis, trauma, infection, dental problems, radiation effects, psychological crisis, pregnancy complications, equipment-related injuries all become more serious when Earth cannot send help quickly. A Mars settlement is not truly permanent until it can manage illness. That is part of the distance problem too. The farther humans go, the more civilization they must carry with them. Mars also complicates return. A mission to the Moon can be designed around relatively direct travel back to Earth. Mars return depends on planetary alignment, ascent from the Martian surface, rendezvous or direct departure, life support for the journey, and enough fuel or fuel production. Some mission concepts rely on producing propellant from Martian resources before astronauts leave the surface. That means the return path may depend on machines that must work correctly before the crew even arrives. This creates a brutal requirement. Do not send humans until the way home is reliable. A colony, by definition, may not intend for everyone to return, but even colonists need options. A permanent settlement without emergency evacuation is a far more serious commitment than any temporary mission. It means accepting that Mars is not an expedition camp. It is a place where failures must be handled locally. Distance also changes politics and governance. A settlement months from help cannot wait for every decision to come from Earth. Local authority becomes necessary. Disputes must be resolved on site. Resource allocation must be managed. Emergency rules must be clear. Communication delays make centralized control inefficient and sometimes dangerous. A Mars community would need a degree of self-governance long before it becomes truly independent. That raises difficult questions. Who decides what risks are acceptable? Who controls oxygen, water, power, and transport? What happens when Earth-based organizations own the infrastructure, but Mars-based humans depend on it to survive? How much autonomy does a settlement need when delay makes direct command impractical? The distance between planets becomes a distance between systems of authority. Supply chains also affect economics. A Mars settlement cannot become a city in the ordinary sense if every essential item must be shipped from Earth at enormous cost. To grow, it must eventually produce more locally: water, oxygen, fuel, building materials, spare parts, maybe food. But local production requires equipment, energy, labor, and time. It requires mining, processing, manufacturing, storage, and quality control in a hostile environment. That means Mars colonization is not simply exploration. It is industrialization under extreme conditions. And because of distance, every step must be planned with a level of resilience far beyond ordinary construction. On Earth, if a project lacks something, supply can be arranged. On Mars, the missing item may not arrive until the next window. The settlement must either do without it, make it, repair it, or fail. This is why comparing Mars to the Moon can create false confidence. The Moon is hard, but it can function as a nearby proving ground. It allows shorter missions, faster communication, more frequent launch opportunities, and emergency scenarios that are at least closer to Earth's reach. Mars demands a different philosophy. The Moon teaches us how to operate beyond Earth. Mars demands that we survive without Earth nearby. That is the difference. One is a frontier near home, the other is a remote world. This does not make Mars unreachable. It means the challenge is deeper than getting there. Humanity can likely send crews to Mars with enough investment, planning, and risk tolerance. The harder question is whether humans can stay, build, repair, grow, and endure there without relying on Earth as an immediate lifeline. Distance turns Mars from a destination into a system problem. Every kilogram, every tool, every procedure, every backup plan, every medical kit, every habitat seal, every communication delay, every launch window, every psychological stressor becomes part of that system. Mars is not impossible because it is far away. But because it is far away, every other problem becomes harder. Radiation is harder because exposure lasts longer. Life support is harder because resupply is slow. Equipment failure is harder because repair must be local. Medical emergencies are harder because evacuation is unlikely. Psychology is harder because isolation is deeper. Planning is harder because mistakes cannot be fixed quickly. Supply chains are harder because the planets do not wait for human schedules. This is the true distance problem. Not simply the number of miles or kilometers between worlds, but the way distance changes the meaning of survival. Mars is far enough that Earth becomes less like a rescue platform and more like a distant origin. It remains the source of supplies, knowledge, communication, and memory, but not immediate help. A crew on Mars would stand on another planet, with Earth reduced to a signal across space. A settlement on Mars would have to become more than brave. It would have to become capable, because on Mars, distance is not empty space between worlds. Distance is time, delay, risk, isolation, and the hard truth that help, if it comes, may arrive only after the people on Mars have already had to save themselves. The greatest danger on Mars may not be the cold. It may not be the dust storms, the distance, the thin air, or the red emptiness stretching beyond the habitat walls. It may be something no astronaut can see, something that passes through metal, plastic, skin, and bone with no sound. Something that does not announce itself with a flash or a warning light until instruments begin to measure the damage. Something that turns deep space and the Martian surface into an environment fundamentally different from Earth. Radiation is one of the hardest barriers to long-term human survival on Mars. On Earth, we live inside a natural shield so constant that we almost forget it exists. Above us is a thick atmosphere, a deep ocean of air that absorbs and scatters much of the dangerous radiation coming from space. Around us is Earth's magnetic field, a planetary defense that helps deflect charged particles from the sun and cosmic rays from beyond the solar system. Together, they do not make Earth perfectly radiation-free, but they make the surface stable enough for biology to flourish over billions of years. Life evolved inside that protection. Mars does not offer the same shelter. The Martian atmosphere is extremely thin compared with Earth's. It provides some protection, but not nearly enough for human beings to live safely on the surface without additional shielding. Mars also lacks a strong global magnetic field like Earth's. In its ancient past, Mars may have had a more protective magnetic environment, but today, the planet's surface is far more exposed to space radiation. That exposure begins before astronauts ever land. The journey to Mars is itself a radiation problem. Between Earth and Mars, a crew would travel through interplanetary space, outside the full protection of Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field. The spacecraft would become their shelter, but spacecraft are limited by mass. Every kilogram of shielding must be launched, accelerated, and carried across millions of miles. A ship cannot simply be wrapped in endless layers of protection without making the mission far more difficult. And radiation in space comes in more than one form. One threat comes from the Sunday. Solar particle events can send intense bursts of energetic particles into space. These events are not constant, but when they happen, they can be dangerous. A strong solar storm could expose astronauts to high radiation doses over a short time, especially if the spacecraft or habitat does not have a protected storm shelter. The other threat is more constant and harder to block: galactic cosmic rays. These are high-energy particles arriving from beyond the solar system, produced by powerful astrophysical events such as supernovae and other violent cosmic processes. They travel through space at enormous speeds and can penetrate shielding materials. Some are heavy atomic nuclei moving with tremendous energy. When they strike spacecraft walls, habitat materials, or human tissue, they can create secondary particles, spreading the problem in complex ways. This is what makes shielding difficult. It is not always as simple as placing a thick wall between the astronaut and space. Certain materials can reduce exposure. Hydrogen-rich materials, water, and some plastics may help in specific ways. Metal can protect against some radiation, but high-energy cosmic rays can interact with it and produce secondary radiation. The best shielding strategy depends on the type of radiation, the mission duration, habitat design, available mass, and acceptable risk. On Earth, the planet provides the shielding for free. On Mars, humans must engineer it. That is a brutal difference. Short visits may be managed with careful planning, radiation monitoring, mission timing, and storm shelters. But colonization is not a short visit. A colony means years, decades, possibly entire lives. The longer people remain on Mars, the more radiation becomes a slow accumulation of risk. Radiation does not need to kill instantly to matter. It can damage DNA. It can increase the risk of cancer. It may affect the central nervous system. It may contribute to cardiovascular problems. It can influence immune function and tissue repair. The exact risks depend on dose, particle type, shielding, individual biology, exposure time, and many uncertainties. But the principle is clear. Long-term human life beyond Earth's natural protection must confront radiation as a central design problem, not a background detail. A Mars settlement cannot treat shielding as optional. It would have to build protection into its architecture from the beginning. One possible strategy is to go underground. Beneath the Martian surface, layers of soil and rock can absorb radiation more effectively than a lightweight surface habitat. Underground habitats, lava tubes, buried modules, or structures covered with Martian regolith could provide far better protection than exposed buildings. The idea is not simply aesthetic, it is survival logic. Mars may be most livable not under open sky, but under the planet's own dust and stone. Regolith protection is one of the most practical concepts. Instead of launching all shielding material from Earth, settlers could use the local soil. Habitats could be covered with layers of Martian material, forming a protective barrier against radiation and temperature extremes. This sounds simple in principle, but it creates engineering challenges. Machines would have to move large amounts of regolith reliably in low gravity, cold temperatures, and dusty conditions. Habitats would need to withstand the load. Construction would need to avoid damaging seals, airlocks, solar arrays, cables, and life support systems. Even dirt becomes complicated on another planet. Storm shelters would also be essential. A Mars habitat might include a heavily shielded core where astronauts could retreat during solar particle events. This area could be surrounded by water tanks, food supplies, equipment, or other materials that add shielding mass. During periods of elevated solar activity, crews could remain inside until the danger passes. But a shelter is not a complete solution. It helps with sudden solar events. It does not fully solve the constant background exposure from galactic cosmic rays. That long-term exposure is one reason colonizing Mars is harder than sending a crew there. A mission can accept a certain amount of risk for a limited period. A permanent settlement must reduce risk enough for normal life, repeated work, reproduction, childhood development, medical care, and aging. That is a different standard. A true colony cannot be built on the assumption that everyone is temporarily enduring danger. At some point, it must become a place where humans can live. Radiation also affects the design of daily life. If exposure outside the habitat is limited, then surface work becomes carefully rationed. Astronauts may need to spend most of their time inside shielded environments. Robotic systems might perform high-exposure tasks. Suits would need to provide life support, pressure, thermal control, dust protection, and some radiation monitoring. But wearable shielding is limited because heavy suits are difficult to move in. The Martian surface may look like open wilderness, but for humans, it would be a place of controlled exposure. Every excursion would have a radiation cost. Every delay outside would matter. Every solar warning could become urgent. This changes the psychology of colonization. The romantic image of settlers walking freely under the Martian sky does not match the likely reality. Much of life may occur indoors, underground, or beneath protective cover. Windows may be limited or heavily shielded. Greenhouses may need protection. Work schedules may depend on space weather. The open surface may be less like a frontier landscape and more like a hazardous exterior zone. Mars is beautiful, but beauty does not make it safe. Radiation also affects infrastructure. Electronics can be damaged by energetic particles. Sensors, computers, communication systems, power controls, and medical equipment must be hardened or protected. A single human body is not the only vulnerable system. A Mars settlement would depend on machines, and machines exposed to radiation can malfunction. Long-term reliability becomes harder when the environment constantly attacks both biology and technology. This is another reason shielding becomes part of civilization. Protect the people, protect the computers, protect the life support systems, protect the stored seeds, medicines, food supplies, and scientific instruments. A settlement is only as safe as the systems that keep it alive. The radiation problem also forces ethical questions. What level of risk is acceptable? For trained astronauts on a limited mission, higher risk may be accepted knowingly. But colonization raises broader questions. What about workers who remain for years? What about families? What about children born on Mars, if that ever becomes part of the plan? What about medical care for radiation-induced illness when Earth is months away? A colony must not only survive, it must decide what kind of risk is morally acceptable for the people who live there. This is where Mars colonization becomes more than engineering. It becomes a question about what it means to carry human life into an environment that never evolved to protect it. On Earth, safety is partly inherited. On Mars, safety must be designed. Every layer of protection is artificial, deliberate, and vulnerable to failure. And radiation is the threat that makes that truth unavoidable. The surface may look still. The danger is moving through it constantly. Invisible particles from the Sunday cosmic rays from beyond the solar system. Secondary particles created when radiation strikes matter. A quiet rain of energy across a planet with too little atmosphere and too little magnetic shielding to stop it. This does not make Mars impossible. It makes Mars honest. Any serious plan must treat radiation as one of the first design constraints. Habitats may need to be buried. Storm shelters must be included. Radiation monitoring must be continuous. Mission timing must account for solar activity. Medical systems must track long-term exposure. Materials must be chosen carefully. Surface work must be limited and planned. Settlement architecture must accept that the safest Mars may be partly hidden beneath the ground. The dream of Mars often imagines domes under a red sky. The reality may be tunnels, covered habitats, shielded modules, buried laboratories, and controlled pathways between protected spaces. Not because humans lack imagination, because biology has limits. The human body is a product of Earth's shelter. It did not evolve under galactic cosmic rays on an exposed desert planet. It did not evolve to repair unlimited radiation damage. It did not evolve for years in a thin atmosphere world without a planetary magnetic shield. To live on Mars, humans would have to bring not only machines, but protection equivalent to a small artificial Earth. Radiation is a reminder that a planet is more than land. Earth is not only ground beneath our feet. It is atmosphere, magnetosphere, water, chemistry, temperature, and shielding. It is a layered defense system, so natural that we mistake it for normal. Mars shows us what happens when much of that defense is missing. The greatest danger on Mars may not be what humans can see, but what passes silently through the body. It is invisible. It is patient. It does not care about ambition, courage, or dreams of settlement. It asks only whether humans can build enough protection between fragile biology and the universe beyond Earth. On Mars, survival begins before food, before water, before construction, before science. It begins with pressure and air. That sounds simple, because on Earth breathing feels like the most ordinary act in the world. The body does it without thought. Air presses gently against the skin. Oxygen enters the lungs. Carbon dioxide leaves. The atmosphere surrounds every moment of life so completely that it becomes invisible to us. We notice air only when it moves as wind, when it carries sound, when it fills the chest after exertion, or when it is suddenly missing. But on Mars, air is not a background condition. It is an engineered resource. The Martian atmosphere exists, but it is not an atmosphere humans can live in. It is extremely thin compared with Earth's, and it is mostly carbon dioxide. There is no breathable mix of oxygen and nitrogen waiting outside a habitat door. There is no dense blanket of air pressing safely against the body. There is no atmosphere thick enough to make unprotected human life possible on the surface. Mars has weather. It has winds. It has dust storms. It has clouds, seasonal changes, and atmospheric motion. But for a human being, the Martian air is almost a vacuum compared with Earth. That is one of the hardest truths to absorb. Mars looks like a world with a sky. It has a horizon. It has landscapes, valleys, plains, dunes, frost, and sunlight. It is not the absolute emptiness of deep space, and yet, from the point of view of the human body, standing unprotected on Mars would not feel like standing in thin mountain air. It would be far more severe. The pressure is too low, the oxygen is absent, and the body cannot function normally. A person cannot breathe carbon dioxide. And breathing is not the only problem. Pressure matters. Human biology evolved under Earth's atmosphere, where air pressure helps keep gases dissolved in the body and allows the lungs to exchange oxygen safely. In a low-pressure environment, the body is no longer operating within its normal physical conditions. Fluids behave differently. Breathing becomes impossible without a pressurized system. Oxygen alone is not enough if the surrounding pressure is dangerously low. Life requires not only the right gas, but the right pressure to use it. This means that every human presence on Mars must happen inside a pressure system. A spacesuit is a pressure system. A habitat is a pressure system. A rover cabin is a pressure system. A greenhouse is a pressure system. An airlock is a pressure system. A Mars settlement would be, at its most basic level, a set of sealed volumes holding a small artificial atmosphere against a planet that cannot provide one. That is a brutal engineering reality. On Earth, a building can leak a little air and still remain livable. Open a window, and the outside atmosphere comes in. A crack in the wall is not instantly dangerous. A door can open to the street. People can step outside wearing ordinary clothes. The air inside and outside is part of the same planetary system. On Mars, inside and outside are two different worlds. Inside is warmth, pressure, oxygen, humidity, and life support. Outside is thin carbon dioxide, cold, dust, low pressure, and radiation. A wall is not just a wall. It is the boundary between life and an environment that cannot support it. This changes the meaning of architecture. A Martian habitat cannot be built like a house. It must be built like a spacecraft, a submarine, and a laboratory at the same time. Every seam matters. Every seal matters. Every valve matters. Every window, if there is one, becomes a structural and safety decision. Every hatch must hold pressure reliably. Every connection between modules must be tested. Every airlock must work again and again, without allowing too much loss of atmosphere. A leak is not merely a maintenance problem, it is a survival problem. Some leaks might be small and manageable. Sensors could detect pressure loss. Systems could isolate modules. Crews could patch the damaged area. Backup oxygen and emergency masks could buy time. But the possibility of leakage must shape everything from design to daily routine. A settlement cannot assume that the atmosphere will stay in place because walls look solid. It must constantly monitor itself. The habitat must know if it is dying. Airlocks become one of the most important pieces of infrastructure. To go outside, a person cannot simply open a door. The air inside would rush outward, wasting precious atmosphere and endangering everyone. Instead, astronauts must move through a controlled transition space. The inner hatch closes, pressure is adjusted, the suit is checked, the outer hatch opens. The person enters the Martian exterior not as someone stepping outside a building, but as a human system sealed inside another system. Every surface operation begins with this ritual. Every return requires another. Airlocks must keep dust out, preserve pressure, protect seals, and function under repeated mechanical stress. They must handle suits, tools, samples, emergency returns, and possibly injured crew members. If dust gets into joints, seals, filters, or mechanical systems, the airlock itself can become a vulnerability. And Martian dust is not just dirt. It is fine, persistent, electrostatically clingy, and potentially chemically irritating or toxic, depending on composition. It can coat suits, clog mechanisms, scratch surfaces, enter habitats, contaminate equipment, and become a health concern if inhaled indoors. On the Moon, dust was already a major problem for astronauts and hardware. Mars dust may be different, but it is still a serious issue for any long-term settlement. A habitat must breathe cleanly. That means filtration, dust control, suit ports or external suit storage, cleaning systems, separated dirty zones and clean zones, careful handling of samples, maintenance of filters and seals. The problem is not only making oxygen, it is keeping the indoor environment safe over months and years. Oxygen production is another major challenge. Carrying all breathable air from Earth would be difficult for any long-term settlement. Mars does offer carbon dioxide in its atmosphere, and that creates an opportunity. Machines can, in principle, extract oxygen from carbon dioxide. Demonstrations have shown this is possible at small scale. For a real colony, the challenge becomes scale, reliability, energy demand, and integration into life support. A few grams of oxygen are a proof of concept. A settlement needs continuous supply. Humans need oxygen for breathing. Rockets may need oxygen for fuel combustion. Medical systems may need stored gas. Emergency reserves must be maintained. Agriculture, industrial processes, and habitat expansion would increase demand. The system cannot only work once in a test. It has to work day after day, through dust, cold, mechanical wear, and limited repair options. Mars offers resources, but every resource must be processed. Its atmosphere is not breathable. Its pressure is not safe. Its carbon dioxide is useful only if machines can transform it. This is the pattern of Mars. Nearly everything needed for survival exists either in the wrong form, the wrong place, the wrong concentration, or behind serious engineering barriers. The atmosphere is a good example. It is present, but too thin. It contains carbon dioxide, but not breathable oxygen. It can be used for oxygen production, but only through machines. It creates winds and dust movement, but not enough pressure for human life. It offers some braking during spacecraft entry, but not enough to make landing heavy payloads easy. Mars gives partial help, never full support. That partial help is what makes it both promising and dangerous. A settlement must turn partial resources into complete life support systems. Maintaining a livable indoor environment would require far more than oxygen. The air inside a habitat must have the right pressure, the right gas mixture, the right temperature, the right humidity, and controlled levels of carbon dioxide and trace contaminants. People exhale carbon dioxide. Machines release chemicals. Materials outgas. Dust enters. Microbes grow. Moisture condenses. Fires behave differently in controlled atmospheres. Filters age. Sensors drift. A habitat atmosphere is not something created once. It is something managed continuously. The life support system must remove carbon dioxide before it builds to dangerous levels. It must replace oxygen. It must control humidity so the habitat does not become too dry, too damp, or prone to condensation inside walls and equipment. It must scrub contaminants. It must circulate air. so pockets of unsafe gas do not form. It must detect smoke, leaks, toxins, pressure changes, and equipment failure. It must do all of this quietly, constantly, and with enough redundancy that one failure does not become fatal. On Earth, nature does much of this at planetary scale. Plants, oceans, weather, atmospheric circulation, and enormous chemical reservoirs help regulate the air. On Mars, machines must perform the work of a planet. This is one of the deepest realities of colonization. A Mars base is not only a building, it is a synthetic environment, a controlled bubble of Earth-like conditions maintained inside a world that constantly tries to pull those conditions away. Every breath becomes part of a loop, oxygen produced or stored, carbon dioxide removed or processed, water recycled, energy supplied, heat managed, pressure held. The colony lives only as long as the loop holds. Spacesuits face the same problem in miniature. A suit must provide pressure, oxygen, carbon dioxide removal, temperature control, mobility, communication, radiation monitoring, dust resistance, and emergency support. It must allow a person to work, bend, grasp tools, walk, climb, fall, recover, and return safely. It must resist abrasion from dust and rock. It must interface with airlocks and rovers. It must be maintainable on Mars. A spacesuit is not clothing. It is a personal spacecraft, and like any spacecraft, it can fail. A puncture, seal failure, regulator problem, oxygen issue, cooling failure, communication loss, or dust-compromised joint could become a crisis far from the habitat. Surface exploration on Mars will always carry this tension. The landscape may invite movement, but every movement depends on a sealed system wrapped around the body. This is why Mars colonization cannot be imagined as simply living outdoors under domes. Even domes, often shown as symbols of future cities, are far more difficult than they appear. A large transparent dome must hold pressure across a wide area, withstand temperature changes, resist dust, absorb impacts, protect against radiation, and maintain seals. The larger the pressurized volume, the greater the structural challenge. A small leak in a large system may be harder to locate and repair. A pressure failure could affect many people at once. The romantic image of glass cities under the Martian sky may not be the most realistic first step. Early settlements are more likely to be compact, modular, buried, shielded, and heavily engineered. Less like open cities, more like life support fortresses. That may sound bleak, but it is not meant to remove the wonder. It reveals the seriousness of the task. Humans may one day live on Mars, but they will do so by understanding that habitability is not automatic. It must be constructed. Every interior space must be won from the outside environment. Every pressurized volume must be defended against leaks, dust, radiation, cold, and mechanical failure. The Martian atmosphere is not an enemy. It is simply not enough. It cannot be breathed. It cannot provide safe pressure. It cannot shield like Earth's air. It cannot make the surface gentle. But it can be studied. It can be used. It can be processed for oxygen. It can teach us about planetary climate, ancient habitability, dust cycles, and atmospheric evolution. Mars may not support human life directly, but its atmosphere is still part of the story of how worlds change over time. In that sense, Mars is a warning and a lesson. It shows what a terrestrial planet can become when the atmosphere is thin, water is mostly locked away or lost, and surface conditions no longer support biology as Earth does. It reminds us that air is not a simple background. Air is planetary protection. Pressure is survival. A thick atmosphere is not just sky. It is part of what makes a world livable. On Earth, we are born into pressure. On Mars, we would have to manufacture it. That difference defines the entire challenge. Before agriculture, before industry, before culture, before any true city, there must be sealed spaces that do not fail. There must be air that stays inside. There must be oxygen that can be produced, stored, and delivered. There must be systems that remove what humans exhale and filter what Mars tries to bring in. There must be airlocks between the living world and the outside world. There must be suits that let human bodies briefly enter a place where bodies do not belong. On Mars, survival begins with pressure, air, and sealed spaces that cannot fail. Everything else comes after the breath. A Mars colony is not a city at first. It is a life support machine with people inside it. That is the first hard truth. Before there are streets, schools, gardens, workshops, laboratories, or any meaningful sense of normal life, there must be a closed system that keeps human bodies alive on a planet that does not naturally support them. There must be water that can be found, extracted, cleaned, stored, recycled, and protected. There must be food that can be grown, delivered, preserved, or manufactured under controlled conditions. There must be air, heat, pressure, power, waste treatment, spare parts, and enough redundancy that one broken system does not become the end of the settlement. On Earth, survival feels open. Water flows through rivers, falls as rain, gathers in lakes, moves through pipes, and returns through natural cycles so large that most of the time we do not think about them. Food grows in soil under a thick atmosphere, protected by a magnetic field, warmed by sunlight, supported by microbes, insects, nutrients, weather, and an entire biosphere. Waste is broken down by ecosystems, diluted by oceans, processed by bacteria, recycled by plants, and managed by human infrastructure built on top of a living planet. Mars has no such safety net. Mars may contain water ice, and that is one of the reasons the planet remains so compelling. Water is survival. Water is drinking, hygiene, agriculture, chemistry, oxygen production, fuel production, radiation shielding, thermal control, and industrial processing. A settlement without accessible water is not a settlement. It is an outpost waiting for supplies to run out. But water on Mars is not waiting in clear rivers. It is not falling as rain. It is not flowing into lakes where humans can simply pump it into tanks. Much of it is frozen, buried, mixed with soil, locked in polar regions, hidden below the surface, or present in forms that require energy and machinery to access. A promising map of subsurface ice is not the same as a working water supply. To use Martian water at scale, humans would have to locate it precisely, land near it safely, dig for it, melt it, purify it, store it, distribute it, and keep the system running through dust, cold, mechanical wear, and limited repair options. That is much harder than saying Mars has ice. The difference between resource and usable resource is everything. A buried layer of ice is only useful if the machines can reach it. A deposit is only valuable if it is close enough to the settlement to extract efficiently. Water mixed with dust and salts may need purification. Storage tanks must resist freezing, contamination, leaks, and pressure changes. Pipes, pumps, filters, heaters, drills, and processing units must work in an environment where replacement parts may be months away. Water becomes infrastructure, and infrastructure becomes survival. The same is true for food. Food is not simply calories delivered to Mars. For a short mission, stored supplies may be enough. Carefully packaged food can be launched from Earth, rationed, and consumed according to mission plans. But colonization changes the problem. A settlement that depends entirely on food shipments from Earth is not truly self-sustaining. It is a distant camp connected to Earth by an expensive and fragile supply chain. To become a colony, Mars must eventually produce much of its own food. That is where the difficulty becomes severe. Food production on Mars cannot begin with open fields. There is no breathable atmosphere. The pressure is too low. The temperatures are harsh. Radiation is a constant concern. The soil, more accurately called regolith, is not Earth soil. It lacks the living ecosystem of microbes, organic matter, worms, fungi, nutrients, and water cycles that support terrestrial agriculture. It may contain chemicals that would need careful handling before crops could grow safely. The surface environment is not friendly to plants any more than it is friendly to people, so food would have to grow inside controlled environments. Greenhouses, hydroponic systems, aeroponic systems, bioreactors, artificially lit farms, pressurized agricultural modules. Each of these sounds possible, and some are possible in principle, but none are simple at settlement scale. Plants need water, nutrients, carbon dioxide, light, temperature control, humidity control, disease management, pollination strategies, waste recycling, and protection from radiation and contamination. They need stable systems, not just hopeful designs. A greenhouse on Mars is not a garden. It is a biological life support engine. Hydroponics may be one of the most practical early methods. Plants can grow without soil, using nutrient-rich water delivered directly to roots. This avoids some problems with Martian regolith and allows tighter control. But hydroponics still requires water, nutrients, pumps, sensors, lighting, power, temperature regulation, and constant monitoring. If a pump fails, crops can die. If nutrient balance is wrong, growth suffers. If mold spreads, food supply is threatened. If power is interrupted, the farm becomes vulnerable quickly. Food production is not just planting seeds. It is maintaining a controlled ecosystem under alien conditions. Energy is central to this. Crops need light. On Earth, sunlight arrives through an atmosphere that protects life. On Mars, sunlight is weaker than on Earth, and dust storms can reduce available light for long periods. Greenhouses may use natural sunlight, artificial lighting, or a hybrid approach. But artificial lighting requires power, and power on Mars is already needed for everything: life support, heating, oxygen production, communications, water extraction, computing, manufacturing, vehicles, medical equipment, and fuel production. Every system competes for energy. If a settlement relies on solar power, dust accumulation and storms become serious concerns. If it uses nuclear power, it must transport or build safe, reliable reactors or power units. Energy storage becomes vital. Power distribution must be robust. A failure in the energy system can cascade into water, air, food, heating, communications, and habitat safety. On Mars, electricity is not convenience, it is metabolism. A settlement must breathe through machines, drink through machines, eat through machines, and stay warm through machines. The more self-sufficient it becomes, the more complex its internal cycles must be. This is why closed-loop life support is so important. A closed-loop system tries to recycle as much as possible. Water from breath, sweat, urine, washing, cooking, and plant growth must be recovered and purified. Carbon dioxide exhaled by humans may be removed from air. and potentially used by plants or chemical systems. Oxygen must be generated and replenished. Waste must be processed into safe forms and eventually into useful nutrients. Food scraps, biological waste, packaging, and contaminated materials all become part of the settlement's internal economy. On Earth, waste can be thrown away because Earth is vast. On Mars, there is no away. Everything that enters the settlement has mass, cost, and value. Every molecule of water matters. Every kilogram of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, carbon, and trace nutrient matters. Every filter, container, tool, and spare part matters. A Mars colony cannot afford to treat resources casually. It must become a circular system because the outside world does not provide easy replacements. This sounds efficient, but closed-loop systems are hard. Perfect recycling is not realistic. There are always losses. Filters degrade, materials leak, chemicals accumulate, microbes behave unpredictably, machinery wears down, human behavior introduces messiness into elegant designs. A system that works in a laboratory may struggle under the stress of real life, real crews, real dust, real emergencies, and years of operation. A Mars settlement would need reserves, stored water, stored food, stored oxygen, stored spare parts, stored medicines, stored nutrients, stored fuel. But storage is not a complete solution. Stored supplies run out. They degrade. They require space and temperature control. They add launch mass. They can be lost in landing failures or damaged during transit. A settlement must balance stored security with local production. Too much dependence on storage makes the colony fragile. Too much dependence on local production before it is reliable makes it dangerous. Survival lies in redundancy. Bring supplies, recycle aggressively, produce locally, maintain backups, design for failure. This is the logic of Mars. Fuel production adds another layer. Water is not only for drinking and farming, it can be part of propellant production. Oxygen extracted from water or carbon dioxide may be used as oxidizer for rockets. Hydrogen from water, combined with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, could support certain fuel production pathways. In some mission concepts, producing fuel on Mars is essential for returning crews to Earth or enabling surface operations. That means water extraction and chemical processing become tied not only to life support, but to mobility and escape. If the fuel plant fails, the mission changes. If water extraction fails, the settlement changes. If oxygen production fails, survival changes. The same resource threads through every system. That is why self-sufficiency is so difficult. A city on Earth is not self-sufficient in the pure sense. It depends on farms, power grids, factories, mines, transportation networks, oceans, rivers, atmosphere, and global trade. Even remote communities are connected to larger systems. A Mars colony would begin with far fewer support layers and far greater consequences for failure. It would need to become a city, a farm, a factory, a water plant, a power station, a recycling center, a hospital, and a spacecraft all at once. At first, it would not feel like civilization expanding into open space. It would feel like civilization compressed into a sealed machine. Every meal would have a history of engineering behind it. Water extracted or recycled, nutrients measured, plants grown under controlled light, air filtered, waste processed, power supplied, temperature maintained, contamination prevented. Every cup of water would have passed through systems that must not fail. Every breath would be part of a loop. Every harvest would be both food and proof that the settlement can continue. There is a psychological dimension to this too. Food is not only nutrition, it is comfort, culture, routine, and mental stability. Crews cannot live indefinitely on efficiency alone without cost. Fresh food could become emotionally important, not just medically useful. Growing plants may provide psychological relief in an environment of metal walls, dust, and red silence. A small green space inside a Martian habitat might become one of the most valuable places in the settlement. But that green space would be fragile. Plants would not represent a return to Earth-like nature. They would be nature under life support, protected from low pressure, radiation, cold, and contamination. The sight of leaves on Mars would be beautiful because they would be so difficult to sustain. Contamination also matters. Humans bring microbes. Crops bring microbes. Habitats develop microbial ecosystems. Some microbes are helpful, some harmful, some merely persistent. In a closed environment, microbial balance becomes important for health, agriculture, air quality, water systems, and equipment. At the same time, planetary protection concerns remain. Mars may hold clues to past or even present microbial life, and human contamination could complicate the search for it. A colony would have to manage life carefully because life itself becomes an environmental force. The more humans try to make Mars habitable inside sealed spaces, the more they bring Earth biology into a non-Earth world. That is necessary for survival, but it must be controlled. Mold in a habitat, bacteria in water systems, pathogens in close quarters, biofilms in pipes, and crop diseases in greenhouses could all become serious problems. On Earth, ecosystems absorb many mistakes. On Mars, a small biological imbalance could spread through critical systems. This is why colonization is not simply an expansion of territory. It is the construction of an artificial biosphere. Not a complete biosphere like Earth's, but a managed loop of air, water, food, waste, and energy. The settlement must create enough Earth-like conditions for humans to survive while remaining isolated from the Martian exterior. It must be open enough to grow, closed enough to protect life, efficient enough to conserve resources, flexible enough to handle failure, stable enough to become home. That is an extraordinary demand, and it reveals something profound about Earth. Our planet is not simply a rock with life on it. It is a life support system of almost impossible richness. It recycles water through oceans, atmosphere, ice, rivers, soil, and living organisms. It grows food through sunlight, chemistry, microbes, and climate. It dilutes waste, renews air, buffers temperature, shields radiation, and supports complexity across scales no human technology can yet fully replicate. Mars forces us to see what Earth has been doing for free. The brutal truth is that a Mars colony must rebuild small pieces of that planetary support by hand. Water must be managed like treasure. Food must be grown like engineering. Waste must become resource. Air must be recycled. Power must be constant. Every loop must close as much as possible. Every loss must be understood. Every system must have a backup. A settlement that cannot do this remains dependent on Earth. It may be brave, it may be historic, it may be scientifically valuable, but it is not yet a true colony in the deeper sense. A true colony must endure. It must survive supply delays. It must repair itself. It must produce essentials. It must keep people alive, not for days or months, but for years and eventually for generations if the dream is taken seriously. That dream is not impossible, but it is much harder than landing. Landing is arrival. Life support is permanence. Mars may have water ice, It may offer carbon dioxide for oxygen and fuel production. It may provide minerals, regolith, sunlight, and surface area, but none of those become survival automatically. They must be transformed through machines, energy, labor, knowledge, and time. A Mars colony is not a city at first. It is a life support machine with people inside it. And only if that machine can learn to recycle, grow, repair, and protect life better than any closed system humans have ever built, can the dream of a Martian city begin to move from imagination into reality. The human body was built by Earth, not intentionally, not with design, but through billions of years of evolution under one planet's conditions. Earth's gravity shaped bones, muscles, balance, circulation, development, movement, and the quiet mechanical assumptions inside every cell. Earth's day and night shaped sleep. Earth's atmosphere shaped lungs. Earth's magnetic field and thick air shaped radiation exposure. Earth's ecosystems shaped immunity, food, microbes, and the long biological history that made human life possible. Mars is not Earth, and that matters not only because Mars is cold, dry, thin-aired, and radiation exposed. It matters because even if humans solve the problems of air, water, food, pressure, and shelter, the body itself remains an open question. Can a human being live for years in Martian gravity without serious harm? Can a child develop normally there? Can pregnancy happen safely? Can immune systems remain stable? Can minds endure isolation, confinement, delayed communication, and a world where the outside environment is always lethal? We do not yet know. That uncertainty may be one of the most serious barriers to true colonization. Mars' gravity is much weaker than Earth's. It is not weightlessness. A person standing on Mars would feel pulled downward. Objects would fall. Walking would be possible. The body would still have a sense of up and down. In that way, Mars is very different from orbit, where astronauts experience microgravity and float freely inside spacecraft. But partial gravity is not the same as Earth gravity, and humans have never lived for years, decades, or generations in it. That is the missing experiment. We know that microgravity affects the body in serious ways. Astronauts in orbit lose muscle mass unless they exercise intensely. Bones lose density because they are no longer loaded in the way Earth gravity requires. Fluids shift toward the upper body, affecting the face, head, and cardiovascular system. Some astronauts experience vision changes. Balance must readjust. The immune system may change. The body adapts quickly to an environment it did not evolve for, but that adaptation is not always healthy. Exercise helps. Careful medical monitoring helps. Nutrition helps. But microgravity remains a biological stressor. Mars offers more gravity than orbit, but less than Earth. The essential question is whether Martian gravity is enough to prevent the long-term damage seen in microgravity, or whether the body would still slowly weaken in ways that become dangerous over time. Maybe Mars gravity is sufficient for many systems. Maybe it is not. Maybe some tissues adapt well while others do not. Maybe the effects depend on age, genetics, exercise, nutrition, workload, radiation exposure, and mission duration. The problem is not that we know Mars gravity is fatal. The problem is that we do not know whether it is enough. For a short mission, this uncertainty might be acceptable. Astronauts could train heavily, use medical countermeasures, and return to Earth for recovery. For a permanent settlement, the question becomes far more severe. A colonist might live in partial gravity for years. A child might grow up never experiencing Earth's gravity. A pregnant body might develop another human under conditions no mammal on Earth has evolved to handle. Colonization turns medical uncertainty into civilization risk. Bones are one concern. Human bones are living tissue, constantly remodeling in response to load. On Earth, gravity and movement place stress on the skeleton, helping maintain strength. In low-gravity environments, the body may decide it does not need as much bone. Over time, this can lead to weakening. On Mars, the load would be reduced. Would exercise compensate? Would special resistance equipment be enough? Would children build normal bone density? Would older adults face accelerated fragility? Muscles face a similar question. On Earth, simply standing, walking, lifting, and moving against gravity provides constant conditioning. On Mars, every movement would require less force. That might make daily activity easier, but biologically easier is not always better. Muscles that are not challenged can shrink. Hearts and blood vessels may adapt to a reduced gravitational load. The body may become Martian adapted in ways that make return to Earth difficult or dangerous. A person born on Mars, if that ever happens, might not be able to live safely on Earth. That possibility changes the moral meaning of colonization. It suggests that a second human world might not simply create Earth humans living elsewhere. It could create people biologically shaped by another planet's gravity, people for whom Earth itself becomes physically hostile. That is speculative, but it is not absurd. Development depends on environment. Bones, muscles, balance, and circulation develop under mechanical conditions. Change those conditions for an entire lifetime, and the body may develop differently. Pregnancy is one of the deepest unknowns. Human reproduction evolved under Earth gravity, embryonic development, fluid distribution, placental function, maternal circulation, fetal growth, birth, and early infancy all happen inside a gravitational environment we rarely think about because it has always been there. We do not know how reduced gravity would affect conception, pregnancy, childbirth, or neonatal development. We do not know how radiation exposure would complicate these risks. We do not know whether safe reproduction on Mars would require artificial gravity environments, heavily shielded habitats, or medical systems far beyond what an early settlement could provide. A true colony cannot remain only a crew of visiting adults forever. If Mars is to become a second human home, reproduction and childhood eventually enter the discussion, and that is where the dream becomes ethically heavy. Children cannot consent to experimental planetary conditions. A society that chooses to raise children on Mars would need confidence that they can grow safely, physically, and psychologically. That confidence does not exist yet. It would require research, caution, and perhaps entirely new forms of habitat design. The question is not only whether adults can survive Mars, it is whether human life can continue there without hidden damage passed into the next generation. The immune system adds another layer. Spaceflight can affect immunity, inflammation, stress response, and microbial balance. In a closed Martian habitat, people would live in tight quarters with recycled air, recycled water, limited microbial diversity, and constant environmental stress. Some pathogens could spread quickly. Other microbes might evolve within the habitat environment. The human microbiome, the immense ecosystem of microorganisms living in and on the body, could shift under altered diet, isolation, hygiene practices, radiation exposure, and limited contact with Earth's biosphere. On Earth, humans live inside a living world. On Mars, humans would live inside a sealed microbial island. That isolation could protect against some diseases, but it could also create new vulnerabilities. Limited medical supplies, delayed resupply, and restricted hospital capability would make infections more serious. Antibiotics, vaccines, surgical tools, diagnostic equipment, and trained medical personnel would be essential. A simple illness that is manageable on Earth could become dangerous when Earth is months away and resources are limited. Health on Mars would not be only personal, it would be systemic. Every person's body would be part of the colony's survival system. Mental health may be just as important as physical health. Mars would be an extreme psychological environment. The crew or settlers would live inside sealed spaces, surrounded by a planet where going outside requires equipment and planning. Communication with Earth would be delayed. Privacy would be limited. Social circles would be small. Conflict could not be escaped easily. The landscape outside might be beautiful, but also barren and dangerous. The knowledge that help is far away would never fully disappear. Humans are not built only from biology. We are built from relationships, routines, sensory environments, and meaning. A Mars settlement would need to protect all of these. Sleep could become a challenge. Mars has a day length somewhat similar to Earth's, which is helpful compared with many other worlds. But sleep is influenced by light exposure, stress, workload, habitat design, noise, temperature, social rhythm, and psychological state. Inside sealed habitats, natural light may be limited, work schedules may be intense, emergency alarms, machinery, maintenance cycles, and mission demands could disrupt rest. Poor sleep can affect mood, immunity, decision-making, memory, and conflict. In a place where mistakes can be fatal, tired minds become a safety risk. Isolation also changes time. At first, Mars may feel heroic. Every day may carry mission purpose. But over months and years, novelty fades. The same walls, the same people, the same procedures, the same danger outside, the same delay in messages from Earth, all of this can weigh on the mind. A colonist may not experience open weather, forests, oceans, rain, birds, crowds, or ordinary outdoor freedom. The absence of Earth may become a physical feeling. A settlement must therefore provide more than oxygen and calories. It must provide psychological space, private areas, communal rituals, meaningful work, art, exercise, communication, education, conflict resolution, a sense of future. Without these, Mars could become not a frontier, but a pressure chamber for the human mind. Psychological stress can also feed back into physical health. Chronic stress affects hormones, immunity, sleep, appetite, cardiovascular function, and decision-making. In a closed settlement, interpersonal tension can spread like a system failure. A Mars colony would be small enough that social dynamics matter deeply. Trust, leadership, fairness, workload balance, and emotional support would be survival infrastructure. This is often missing from romantic images of colonization. A city on Mars is not built only from metal, glass, rock, and wires. It is built from human cooperation under conditions that magnify every weakness. Then there is the question of artificial gravity. If partial gravity proves insufficient, settlers may need rotating habitats or centrifuge systems to provide periods of stronger gravitational loading. But building such systems on Mars, or for the journey to Mars, adds complexity. Rotating structures must be large enough or carefully designed to avoid uncomfortable effects. They require power, mass, maintenance, and space. They may be necessary for health, but their engineering demands could be significant. We do not yet know whether Mars gravity alone is enough. That uncertainty shadows every long-term plan. Radiation and gravity may also interact. A body under partial gravity, in a confined environment, exposed to higher radiation, under psychological stress, with altered sleep and limited medical care, may respond differently than a body experiencing any one factor alone. Space medicine is not a collection of separate problems. It is a system: bones, muscles, eyes, brain, blood, immune function, microbes, stress, diet, exercise, and radiation all overlap. Mars colonization is a biological experiment at planetary scale. That does not mean it should never be attempted. But it does mean humility is required. Human beings have survived in deserts, polar regions, submarines, space stations, and orbiting laboratories. We are adaptable. We build shelter, carry tools, design systems, and learn from harsh environments. But Mars is not only harsh. It is alien in several fundamental ways at once. Low gravity, radiation, isolation, distance, low pressure, toxic dust, limited supplies, and dependence on machines combine into a challenge no human population has ever faced. The human body evolved for Earth, and we do not yet know what Mars will do to it over a lifetime. That sentence should sit at the center of every serious colonization plan, not as a reason to abandon Mars, as a reason to respect the unknown. Before Mars becomes a city, it must become a place where human bodies can remain healthy. Before it becomes a second branch of civilization, it must answer whether children can grow there safely. Before it becomes home, it must prove that human minds can endure its distance, confinement, and silence. Before it becomes normal, it must overcome the fact that normal biology is Earth biology. Mars asks whether humans can become a multi-planet species. The body asks a quieter question in return. Can a creature made by one planet truly live on another? For now, the answer is not yet known. Landing humans on Mars would be one of the greatest achievements in the history of exploration. But landing is not colonization. A footprint is not a settlement. A flag is not a civilization. A habitat with a crew inside it is not yet a city. The first humans on Mars would prove that people can reach another planet, survive there for a time, and work on its surface. That would be historic. It would change the story of our species. But the harder question begins after the landing. Can humans stay? Can they build? Can they repair what breaks? Can they produce what they need? Can they survive not only for weeks or months, but for years, decades, and eventually generations? That is where Mars becomes far more difficult than the dream often suggests. Colonizing Mars is not about planting a flag. It is about building an entire world support system on a planet that does not support life. A true colony needs more than rockets. It needs power, habitats, manufacturing, spare parts, medical care, construction materials, communication systems, governance, waste management, and a path toward long-term expansion. It needs a society that can continue functioning when Earth is too far away to rescue it quickly. It needs local capability, not just imported equipment. It needs resilience. An outpost can depend on Earth. A civilization cannot depend on Earth for everything forever. That difference is enormous. An outpost is a place humans visit or occupy with heavy support from home. Supplies arrive from Earth. Replacement parts arrive from Earth. Food, medicine, specialized tools, scientific equipment, and emergency materials come from Earth. The outpost can be brave, valuable, and scientifically important, but it remains part of Earth's logistical system. A civilization must begin to close the loop. It must produce more of its own necessities. It must repair more of its own failures. It must make decisions locally. It must train people, maintain knowledge, grow food, manage conflict, care for the sick, build new structures, and survive when shipments are delayed or lost. It must become something more than a mission. Mars will not make that easy. The surface is cold, dry, low pressure, dusty, radiation exposed, and chemically challenging. The atmosphere cannot be breathed. The soil is not living soil. The planet has no forests, rivers, oceans, insects, farms, roads, hospitals, factories, or power grid. There is no outside air to open a door into, no rain to collect, no natural ecosystem to absorb waste, no nearby city to send help. Everything must be built from the ground up. And the ground itself is hostile. Power is one of the first requirements. Without power, a Mars settlement dies quickly. Power runs oxygen systems, water extraction, heating, communications, computers, medical equipment, lighting, agriculture, pumps, air circulation, manufacturing, rovers, scientific instruments, and fuel production. On Earth, electricity is infrastructure. On Mars, electricity is breath, warmth, water, and survival. Solar power is attractive because sunlight reaches Mars and panels can be deployed. But Mars receives less sunlight than Earth, and dust is a constant problem. Dust can settle on panels, reducing output. Dust storms can dim sunlight for long periods. Even when the wind is not strong by Earth standards, because the air is thin, fine dust can travel widely and cover equipment. A settlement dependent on solar power would need cleaning systems, storage, backups, and careful energy planning. Nuclear power may provide a more stable option, especially for early bases or high-demand operations. But nuclear systems bring their own challenges: launch safety, reactor design, heat rejection, maintenance, shielding, reliability, and political concerns. A Mars colony may eventually need a mix of power sources. It cannot afford a fragile energy system. Energy failure would cascade into every other life support system. Habitats are another foundation. A Mars habitat must be pressurized, insulated, shielded, repairable, and expandable. It must protect against radiation, dust, cold, pressure loss, fire, contamination, and equipment failure. It must provide private spaces, work areas, medical areas, food production, storage, exercise facilities, sanitation, airlocks, and emergency shelters. Early habitats may be delivered from Earth as modules, but long-term expansion requires construction on Mars. That means using local resources whenever possible. Martian regolith could be used for shielding, bricks, concrete-like materials, landing pads, roads, or protective berms. Ice could provide water, oxygen, and fuel ingredients. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere could support oxygen production and chemical processing. Metals and minerals may eventually be extracted and refined. But local resource use is not magic. It requires machines. Machines require power. Machines require maintenance. Maintenance requires tools and spare parts. Spare parts require supply chains or manufacturing. Manufacturing requires materials, precision, labor, knowledge, and more machines. This is the chain that turns a base into an industrial system. It is also why colonization is so hard. A real settlement must not only survive Mars, it must begin to make Mars useful without assuming Earth can send every missing piece. Equipment failure will be inevitable. Pumps will wear out. Filters will clog. Seals will degrade. Motors will fail. Electronics will suffer from radiation, dust, thermal cycling, and age. Rovers will break. Airlocks will need maintenance. Greenhouses will develop leaks or biological problems. Power cables will fail, valves will stick, sensors will drift. Software will malfunction. A settlement that cannot repair itself is not a colony, it is a countdown. Spare parts become one of the most important resources on Mars. But carrying every possible spare part from Earth is unrealistic. The settlement would need inventories, recycling systems, machining capability, additive manufacturing, electronics repair, material processing, and trained people who can improvise safely. A broken component might not be replaced by opening a warehouse. It may need to be fabricated from available material, adapted from another system, or repaired with tools on hand. This is where engineering becomes culture. A Martian society would have to value maintenance as deeply as exploration. The heroes would not only be pilots and scientists, they would be mechanics, electricians, doctors, farmers, programmers, builders, technicians, and people who know how to keep ordinary systems alive under extraordinary conditions. Medical care would also define the difference between outpost and civilization. A short mission can accept limited medical capability. A permanent settlement cannot. People will get sick. People will be injured. Teeth will crack. Bones may break. Infections may occur. Radiation exposure may create long-term health risks. Mental health crises may happen. Pregnancies, if Mars ever reaches that stage, would require medical support far beyond an expedition clinic. A Mars colony would need diagnostics, surgery capability, pharmaceuticals, sterilization, medical imaging, rehabilitation, emergency care, and possibly telemedicine with long communication delays. But distance means doctors on Earth cannot guide every decision in real time. Mars would need local medical competence. Healthcare becomes part of sovereignty. A place is not truly settled if every serious illness must wait for Earth. Waste management is another hidden requirement. On Earth, waste disappears into vast systems. Sewage networks, landfills, recycling plants, atmospheric dilution, microbial ecosystems, oceans, soil, and industrial treatment. On Mars, waste cannot simply be thrown away without consequence. Human waste, food waste, packaging, chemical waste, damaged equipment, contaminated filters, medical waste, and industrial byproducts all have to be handled inside or around a fragile settlement. Some waste must be recycled. Some must be sterilized. Some may become fertilizer or raw material. Some must be isolated. A closed settlement cannot afford to poison itself. Waste is not just an inconvenience. It is chemistry, biology, mass, and risk. The more self-sustaining the colony becomes, the more waste must become resource. Water must be recovered, nutrients must cycle, organic material may need to feed agriculture. Metals and plastics may need to be reused. The settlement must learn to think like an ecosystem, even if it is built from machines. Communication systems are equally essential. Mars cannot be isolated from Earth entirely. Data, instructions, science, culture, emotional connection, and coordination all depend on communication. But communication is delayed, limited by geometry, and vulnerable to equipment failure. A settlement would need orbiters, surface antennas, relay networks, data storage, backup links, and local communication infrastructure. Delayed communication changes society. Earth cannot micromanage Mars. A Martian settlement must make decisions locally. It must have procedures for emergencies, conflicts, resource allocation, and governance. At first, decisions may be governed by mission rules and Earth-based organizations. But as the population grows and communication delays remain unavoidable, local governance becomes more than philosophy. It becomes necessity. Who controls the air? Who controls the water? Who decides how power is distributed? Who chooses whether to expand, conserve, repair, or take risks? Who resolves disputes when everyone depends on the same life support systems? These questions are not distant political theory. On Mars, governance is survival management. A disagreement over maintenance priorities could affect safety. A conflict over scarce resources could threaten stability. A failure of trust could become as dangerous as a mechanical failure. A colony is not only machines, it is social order under pressure. Economic sustainability is another hard barrier. Exploration can be funded as a mission. Colonization requires a reason to continue. A permanent settlement must justify the enormous cost of transport, construction, support, and expansion. Science is a strong reason for outposts. National prestige may support early missions. Private ambition may fund early infrastructure. But a growing civilization needs durable economics. What does Mars produce that is worth the cost? Knowledge, perhaps. Technology, perhaps. Industrial capability in space, perhaps. Fuel production for deeper missions, perhaps. A backup branch of civilization, perhaps. But none of these are simple markets. Mars is far away, expensive to reach, and difficult to export from. Its economy may depend for a long time on Earth-based funding, scientific value, strategic value, or long-term philosophical commitment. Without a sustainable economic model, a settlement may remain permanently dependent on Earth's willingness to pay. That is a fragile foundation for civilization. Dust storms add another layer of difficulty. Mars dust is fine, persistent, and invasive. Planet-wide dust events can reduce sunlight and affect solar power. Dust can cover equipment, degrade seals, scratch surfaces, enter mechanisms, and contaminate habitats. It can complicate airlocks, spacesuits, rovers, solar panels, radiators, and moving parts. Even if Martian winds are often weak in force because the atmosphere is thin, dust itself remains a major engineering hazard. A settlement must be designed around dust from the beginning, not as a seasonal annoyance, as a constant environmental fact. This is why building on Mars may look very different from science fiction. The first real structures may be compact, buried, shielded, modular, and practical. Roads may be made not for beauty, but to reduce dust and equipment wear. Landing pads may be essential to prevent rocket exhaust from blasting debris across habitats. Construction may be robotic before it is human. Expansion may be slow, cautious, and tightly linked to life support capacity. A civilization cannot grow faster than its support systems. That may be the most important principle. If population grows faster than food production, risk rises. If habitats expand faster than power supply, risk rises. If industry grows faster than maintenance capability, risk rises. If ambition outruns redundancy, people die. Mars will punish impatience. The planet does not provide a margin of safety. The settlement must create its own margin. Colonization therefore means mastering dependency. At first, settlers depend on Earth. Then they depend on imported machines. Then they depend on local resources processed by those machines. Eventually, if the colony matures, it depends on its own industries, skills, institutions, and culture. Each stage reduces one dependency while creating another. The goal is not independence in a romantic sense. The goal is resilience. A resilient Mars settlement can survive delayed shipments, damaged equipment, medical emergencies, dust storms, power losses, crop failures, and communication disruptions. It can repair, recycle, adapt, and continue. Without that resilience, Mars remains an outpost. There is nothing wrong with an outpost. A scientific base on Mars would be extraordinary. It could study geology, climate, ancient water, potential biosignatures, atmospheric history, and the future of human spaceflight. It could teach us how to live beyond Earth. It could become one of the greatest laboratories ever built. But a civilization is something else. A civilization has continuity. It has memory. It has children, if biology and ethics ever allow it. It has local skills, local authority, local production, local responsibility. It does not merely survive because Earth sends supplies. It survives because it has become capable of sustaining itself. That is the brutal difference between visiting Mars and colonizing it. A landing is an event. A colony is a system. A civilization is a world. Mars does not naturally provide that world. It offers raw terrain, ice in some regions, minerals, carbon dioxide, sunlight, gravity, and scientific promise. But it does not provide habitability. Humans would have to build habitability from machines, materials, labor, and time. They would have to create an artificial envelope of life and then expand it carefully, one reliable system at a time. This is why the dream is so difficult and so powerful. To build on Mars is to confront what civilization really is. On Earth, civilization is built on a planet already alive with support. We build cities inside an atmosphere, beside water, under a protective sky, within an ecosystem that supplies food and absorbs waste. On Mars, civilization would begin without those gifts. It would have to make them. Mars reveals that a city is not just buildings. A city is air, water, energy, food, medicine, sanitation, repair, law, trust, communication, memory, and continuity. Remove the planet that supports those things, and the city must become its own planet in miniature. That is what Mars colonization truly demands. Not only courage, not only rockets, not only money, but the construction of a complete world support system on a planet that does not support life. And until humans can build that system, maintain it, defend it, and expand it without constant rescue from Earth, Mars will remain what it is now, not our second home, but one of the hardest tests of whether a home can be built beyond the world that made us. Mars is possible, but it is not easy. That may be the most honest sentence we can say about the dream of colonizing another planet. Mars is not fantasy in the sense of being unreachable. It is a real world. We have sent orbiters around it, landers onto it, rovers across it, and instruments into its soil and atmosphere. We have mapped its volcanoes, valleys, plains, polar ice, ancient riverbeds, mineral layers, and dust storms. Mars is not a myth, it is a place. But a place can be real and still be almost impossible to make livable. The hardest truth about Mars is that getting there is only the first threshold. Rockets matter. Landing matters. Propulsion, fuel, heat shields, guidance, and heavy cargo delivery all matter. But rockets do not solve Mars. They only bring humans to the beginning of the problem. After that, every ordinary condition of life has to be engineered against a planet that does not provide it naturally. Air must be made, pressure must be held, water must be found, extracted, cleaned, stored, and recycled. Food must be grown inside controlled systems, radiation must be blocked, waste must be processed, machines must be repaired, power must never stop. Habitats must remain sealed. Medical care must function far from Earth. People must stay sane in isolation. and every system must survive dust, cold, delay, distance, and time. This is why Mars colonization is not near-term destiny. It may happen one day, step by step, through missions, bases, robotic preparation, improved life support systems, local resource use, and generations of hard engineering. But it will not happen just because humanity wants a second world. Desire does not thicken the Martian atmosphere. Ambition does not remove radiation. Inspiration does not create closed-loop agriculture. Courage does not replace water, oxygen, spare parts, or medical systems. Mars will demand more than bravery. It will demand reliability. That is a quieter word, but on Mars, it becomes almost sacred. A reliable oxygen system, a reliable power source, a reliable water extractor, a reliable pressure seal, a reliable airlock, a reliable greenhouse, a reliable medical plan, a reliable way to repair what breaks, a reliable way to endure when Earth is too far away to help quickly. Civilization on Mars would begin not with monuments, but with maintenance. The first true heroes of Mars may not look like the heroes of old exploration stories. They may be engineers checking seals, technicians cleaning filters, doctors monitoring bone loss and radiation exposure, farmers adjusting nutrient flows in hydroponic systems, mechanics repairing pumps, programmers debugging life support software, crews rationing power during a dust storm, people doing careful, repetitive, unglamorous work because, on Mars, ordinary failure can become existential. That is what makes Mars different from a frontier on Earth. On Earth, every frontier still had Earth beneath it. Air was available, gravity was familiar, water existed somewhere in the environment, food could be hunted, grown, traded, or transported within a biosphere. Weather could be dangerous, but the planet itself was alive with systems that supported life. Even the harshest deserts and polar regions remain part of Earth's protective envelope. Mars is outside that envelope. It is not just distant land. It is a world without the background generosity of Earth. This does not make Mars worthless. In fact, it may be exactly why Mars matters. Mars forces us to see what life really depends on. It strips away the illusion that civilization is made only of buildings, machines, markets, and ambition. A civilization is air. It is water, it is energy, it is food, it is health, it is waste management, it is trust, it is a stable environment. It is the invisible cooperation between biology, geology, atmosphere, and technology. On Earth, we inherit most of that. On Mars, we would have to build it. That is the profound lesson hidden inside the brutal one. Mars teaches us that habitability is not simple. A planet is not useful to life merely because it has ground to stand on. A world must have the right pressure, chemistry, temperature, shielding, water availability, energy flow, and long-term stability. Earth is not just where humans happen to live. Earth is an astonishingly complex life support system, refined over billions of years by geology, oceans, atmosphere, sunlight, magnetic protection, and life itself. Mars shows us what is missing when those systems are absent. A thin atmosphere, a cold surface, radiation exposure, no open water, no breathable air, no global biosphere, no natural food system, no easy rescue. The red planet is beautiful, but it is not forgiving. And still, humans continue to look toward it. Why? Because Mars carries more than danger. It carries questions. Did it once have conditions more favorable to life? Did water flow long enough for chemistry to become biology? Could traces of ancient life be preserved in rock, or buried sediments? How did Mars lose much of its early habitability? What does its history reveal about terrestrial planets, climate change, atmosphere loss, and the fragile boundary between a living world and a silent one? Mars is a laboratory of planetary fate. It may help us understand not only another planet, but our own, and the dream of living there, however difficult, reveals something deep about human nature. We are a species that builds shelters against weather, ships against oceans, aircraft against gravity, spacecraft against vacuum, and telescopes against darkness. We are not content only to survive where we began. We ask what lies beyond the horizon, then build tools to reach it. Mars is one of the great horizons, but a mature dream must survive contact with reality. A serious future on Mars cannot be built from slogans. It cannot depend on romantic images alone. It must face biology, engineering, radiation, logistics, psychology, energy, economics, ethics, and time. It must ask whether children can grow safely in partial gravity, whether long-term radiation exposure can be reduced enough, whether food systems can become stable, whether mental health can be protected, whether local manufacturing can replace fragile supply chains, whether a settlement can become economically and socially sustainable, whether human life can remain human when sealed inside machines on a planet that does not welcome it. These questions do not destroy the dream, they make it real. Mars colonization is not impossible because it is hard. Many human achievements once seemed impossible, but the scale of the challenge must be understood clearly. A first landing would be historic, a research base would be extraordinary, a permanent settlement would be more difficult still. A self-sustaining civilization would be a transformation in the history of life. Each step is larger than the last, and none should be confused with the others. Planting a flag is not colonization. Surviving a mission is not building a city. Building an outpost is not creating a civilization. Creating a civilization means building a world support system where none exists naturally. That is the true measure of Mars. The dream asks whether humanity can become multiplanetary. The planet answers with a harsher question. Can humanity reproduce the essential functions of Earth in a place that has almost none of them? Can we build enough protection, recycling, medicine, governance, agriculture, industry, and culture to make life durable? Can we carry not just bodies to Mars, but the conditions that bodies require? There is humility in admitting that we do not yet know. That humility is not weakness, it is the beginning of serious exploration. It prevents fantasy from replacing engineering. It keeps courage from becoming carelessness. It reminds us that Mars is not a blank canvas waiting for human dreams, but a real planet with real constraints. The future may still include humans on Mars. It may begin with small crews and temporary habitats. It may grow through robotic construction, buried modules, nuclear power systems, water extraction, oxygen production, greenhouse experiments, medical research, and local manufacturing. It may take longer than the most optimistic visions suggest. It may require failures, redesigns, and hard lessons. It may never become a second Earth, but it may become a place where humans learn to live beyond Earth in limited, disciplined, carefully protected ways. That would still be extraordinary. A small human settlement on Mars would be one of the most fragile and ambitious creations in history. It would be a human-made island of life on a dead or dormant world. Every breath inside it would be evidence of engineering. Every plant grown there would be a small defiance of the environment. Every repaired machine would be a victory over distance. Every year survived would be proof that life can extend itself, cautiously, beyond the world that made it. But the deeper meaning of Mars may not be escape. It may be perspective. Mars reminds us that Earth is not ordinary. The blue sky, the oceans, the pressure around our bodies, the magnetic shield, the soil beneath plants, the microbes in the ground, the rain, the rivers, the oxygen, the climate stability that allowed civilization to rise. These are not guaranteed features of a rocky planet. They are rare gifts, or at least precious conditions, built by a long planetary history. To imagine living on Mars is to understand Earth more clearly. The brutal truth is not that Mars can never become a human world. It is that Earth already is one, and building another will be one of the hardest things our species has ever attempted. Good night, and see you in the next video.